This is the business culture of agriculture. My name is Andy Junkin. With me today is Erin from Brick Gentry Law in Des Moines, Iowa, and she specializes in agricultural law with a heavy emphasis on farm succession cases. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Hi, Andy. How are you?
Awesome, awesome. And could you tell me a bit of your background and what you've been doing the last decade with your career?
When you say decade, it sounds like a long time, but Andy, I grew up in Mingo, Iowa, a small town east of Des Moines, about 30 minutes. I grew up on livestock, corn, soybean, farm near Mingo, and was involved in the farm all my life. I have one sister, so she and I were very heavily involved in the farming operation. We had a lot of hogs at one time, cattle, 2 horses, a couple dogs, but very involved in the farming operation. I went to Iowa State University after high school and loved it there. Still love the Cyclones, but then, as my dad said, I went to the dark side after Iowa State and went to the University of Iowa and became a Hawkeye and went to law school. So did that and graduated 11 years ago this spring with my law degree, and started practicing in kind of a general practice in Ames. I moved back to Ames. And then I took a job, had an opportunity to take a job at Iowa State at the Center for Agricultural Law and Taxation, and loved it there. I was there for about 4.5, almost 5 years, I think, and worked with a lot of farmers. It was kind of an extension type of post. I was a staff attorney there, and did a lot of writing, a lot of research, a lot of extension type of teaching there at Iowa State. Then I got married, moved down back to the Des Moines area, and decided, if I'm ever going to implement what I've learned here at the center, I need to go back to private practice. And so I did. A man that I still work with, Eldon McAfee, he's kind of the guru of livestock law and ag law, does a lot of environmental work and things like that. He hired me at a law firm called the Beving Law Firm, and I was there since 2011, and we just recently moved to Brick Gentry. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how I came into being involved in agricultural law.
And so 80% of your time would be doing succession planning. Would that be correct, or 50%? Or
I'd say maybe 60. Sometimes it's 70%. And maybe that's even. It depends on the time of the year. During this time of the year, the legislature in Iowa is in session, and so we work with a lot of the commodity groups here in the state, and do a lot of monitoring of legislation, what's going to affect farmers, from environmental, we've had the Waterworks lawsuit here in Iowa, a lot of legislation proposed on the water quality issue, things like that. So I do that. The succession planning, though, that's, I spoke about that a lot at Iowa State. It's been an area that I've just developed a passion for. I really like working with families, and I think that my favorite part of succession planning is sitting down and meeting with them. And there's no one size fits all succession plan. Every family has a different dynamic, and I've seen a lot of different dynamics come into my office. So yeah, I spend a lot of time doing that, and mostly work with farmers. I've been lucky enough to kind of get into a niche, working with farm families, and I think it helps that I grew up on a farm. Kind of gives you a different perspective, and you can kind of understand the passion that goes with farming and growing up that way, and so that's why I really like it. I love what I do.
So you're using the word passion quite a bit. What are you really passionate about doing with succession planning? What are you really concerned that farmers have problems with when it comes to succession planning that you really want to help them with?
You know, farmers, they all get busy in the spring and the fall and during calving season and during different seasons. And a lot of times that planning component, trying to keep the farm business going and get it transferred to the next generation, that gets a little bit lost in those busy times when you're trying to care for your crops and your livestock and raise your family. And so I think what I'm most passionate about is communicating that, this is really important. This is a really important topic. It's part of your job to do these things, to do this planning, to talk to your family, to try to develop a plan that you can implement. Maybe you want to retire. Not a lot of farmers I talk to actually want to retire, but
Exactly.
Maybe that's a goal. And developing a plan to try to get there is really key.
And I'm going to throw a curveball at you, and I hope you don't mind me asking.
Okay.
For a lot of family farms, I think, and succession planning, I'm pretty passionate about this, is that, back in the 1960s when Dad was 60, he needed a hip replacement or his hips were done, and he'd retire and move to town and live the retired lifestyle. I guess nowadays a lot of farmers are getting a hip replacement or getting a heart surgery or getting a piece of cancer taken out of their body, and then they're farming into their 80s. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've noticed that, but I think the average age of succession planning, what's the average age of succession planning that you're seeing? Are you seeing a lot of families put off succession planning because mom and dad are in such good health? And how is that affecting the family dynamics from what you're seeing when people walk in your door?
Yeah, I've seen both sides. I've seen the people that are early planners that come in, they're on top of it. They want to develop a plan with their children. They want to retire. They maybe do want to move into town and see the fruits of their labor, see their kids take over the business. There's some people that are that way. There are, though, what you're talking about, a lot of people that come in, mom and dad are pretty healthy. They just haven't had occasion to do the planning. Now maybe a health issue has arisen, and so that's the impetus to getting in and trying to make a plan. The interesting part is, mom and dad, if they're maybe 80 or in their 80s, the on-farm heir, we'll call them, is maybe now in their 60s and thinking about, I've heard this often. Heard people say, that on-farm heir who's maybe in their 60s say, I can't plan until mom and dad do, but I'm ready to make a plan. And so sometimes it's that generation that forces the older generation to plan. Unfortunately, I sometimes see the older generation maybe not so much wanting to, maybe trying to keep things closer to the vest, in not wanting to include anyone else in the decision making as far as estate planning and succession planning goes. And that's when I see the problems arise. We do have an awful lot of litigated cases out there involving families who failed to plan, or maybe just the older generation not communicating their plan, and hard feelings. And that's when you unfortunately see the tough side of my job. And that's when, we get into these family feuds. And that's really sad to see.
And how is it, we traditionally have this mindset where one generation has to own the farm. Is there a way for, multiple generations to be able to own the farm or own equity in the farm, and so that a son or daughter that are in their early 20s can start to earn their way in the farm by having some sort of side deal in place? I mean, obviously from the IRS perspective, equity in the farming operation has to be gifted, or else it's seen as a taxable income. Yeah. But how have you seen it best to structure it so that, you have multiple generations where the two younger generations are earning more equity, and the older generation remains farming until the day they die, and control the situation until they die?
I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for the younger generation to build equity, and I see that a lot in maybe gifts of machinery. The younger generation starts building some equity in machinery. Younger generation can do maybe the more labor intensive parts of the operation, and start gaining some equity through the livestock operations. I've seen that a lot. We do have this, lifetime exclusion for gifts. So we have this exemption amount that's pretty high, and people can do some lifetime gifting. Of course, there might be basis issues and tax issues you'd want to take a look at before you did that. But if the intent is to keep the farming operation in the family, then gifting is definitely something to look at. And so I always say it takes a team to try to come up with the right plan. And I always feel most comfortable if we're working with the person that's doing the accounting for the operation as well. So whether that's a CPA or farm accountant, in Iowa, we have the Iowa Farm Business Association. They have a lot of consultants and work with a lot of farmers. A lot of CPAs in Iowa, a lot of accountants that are doing a lot of great work, and oftentimes just talking to them gives you a really good perspective of what a family is willing to do. We even talk about that as far as people will ask, do I need to set up a trust? People tell me that I need to do that. What is a trust? Why do I need to do it? Like I said, there's no one size fits all plan. So where one family, a revocable trust of some kind, setting that up might be a really good idea. Another family, maybe you need a different type of plan. Maybe setting up some type of family LLC or limited liability company, limited liability partnership, something like that is the better way to go. So many options out there. And again, there's no one size fits all plan, but there's a lot of opportunity to plan.
Could you explain to the folks that don't know what a revocable trust is? Could you explain the basics of it?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it doesn't have to be too overcomplicated. A revocable trust is essentially, I'll call it kind of an entity that holds your assets. You're the grantor of the trust. You put your assets into the trust. You're generally the initial trustee of that trust. And so during your life, you can make, that's why they call it revocable. You can make any type of change that you want to. It's easy to amend, and I'm kind of speaking in Iowa. Most states are similar. Some states have some different nuances. But a revocable trust is just that. It's revocable. Generally speaking, it helps you avoid that probate process that people oftentimes like to avoid, and can kind of help ease that process when somebody passes away. Generally speaking, when somebody passes away, then that revocable trust becomes irrevocable. And the successor trustee, the person that takes over for that person that has died, will implement the plan that's set up in the trust.
Awesome. And what are the most common structures you see in Iowa as far as succession? I mean, you see a lot of revocable trusts, or what would you characterize within your workload? Like, I mean, there's no one size fits all, but what's the most common you see method of succession you see in your state?
We do a lot of trusts. Probably the most common still, I think, is a good old fashioned will. Where you leave, it's kind of the four corners document, whatever the testator will call them, whatever their intent is, that's how it is. When somebody dies, and that process is administered by the court. The wills are still very common. Revocable trusts are definitely out there and gaining popularity, and a lot of people are setting up revocable trusts. I think banks and even the FSA office, everybody's getting more familiar with revocable trusts. And so I think the comfort level is increasing, with those. That being said, you can kind of accomplish some of the same goals with wills and with revocable trusts. I see a lot of LLCs too being set up, so limited liability companies. A lot of times, somebody has a revocable trust. They may also have an LLC just for liability limiting purposes. And maybe the other thing is if mom and dad do want to leave their assets equally, so if their asset is farmland and they want to leave it equally to 3 children, they might gift units in a limited liability company to all of the children, and then have that on-farm heir be the manager of that limited liability company. So there are a lot of different ways about this, but that's some of the things that I've seen.
Yep. And what are the biggest problems you see with succession planning? Just as we close up, what are the most common problems that you see could be completely avoided by going and seeing the lawyer?
I think, biggest problem is failure to communicate, failure to just start doing something. Burying your head in the sand about and saying, well, I don't want to talk about my death or dying, and going to see a lawyer to try to implement those documents is acknowledging that someday I'm probably going to leave this earth. And so I think most people that come in and make a plan, it's really cool to watch their faces as they walk out of the office, and they, it's like a weight has been lifted off their shoulders because they have a plan. It's flexible enough that they can change it in the future. And that's what I tell people. Just because you've made a plan doesn't mean you can't change it if something else happens. And so making a plan that's flexible is pretty important.
Cool. Well, Erin, this is how do folks get a hold of you? And could you repeat the name of your law firm and the website so they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'd love to talk to any of your viewers. My email is Erin, ERIN .Herbold, HERBOLD @brickgentrylaw.com. And my phone number there is 515-274-1450. And my law firm is called Brick Gentry Law, and we're in West Des Moines, so kind of on the west side of Des Moines.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate that. And you take care and God bless.
You too.